The fresh season is almost upon us in Splatoon 3, and in typical Nintendo fashion, the company decided not to mention anything about it in their recent Direct, and instead resorted to drip-feeding us all information via their Twitter feed. The new season appears to be leaning heavily in a retro direction, with 2 new old specials, a collection of returning or remixed weapons, and the return of the Manta Maria map from Splatoon 2. There's a fair bit of content here, and it should shake up the current meta at least a little bit, especially the new specials. However, there's a fair bit that isn't here as well, particularly in the area of weapon classes. Dualies, brushes, and splatlings are shut out this time after getting at least a little something last season, and the Splatana and Stringer classes haven't seen anything new since they were introduced. Still, at least those classes were in a mostly workable state when the game started, even if brushes were broken later. And then we have Brellas. My name is Kyle, and I like to play and talk about undercover Brellas. A lot. If you enjoy this sort of thing, you should consider subscribing to this channel for more fun and informative Nintendo content. The Brella weapon class has been a buggy mess since the game released, and as a Brella player, it's incredibly frustrating to feel like the class has been abandoned not only by the Splatoon player base, but by the Splatoon developers as well. So how did we get here? And more importantly, why are we all so convinced that things will never get better? I think there are 4 issues at play. Number 1, the new Splatoon netcode. Network connections have been a problem for this game ever since launch, but I think they hit Brellas especially hard because they carry their cover with them, and thus they have the expectation that they're going to be protected. For a weapon like the Splatter Shot, a charger might shoot you through a wall now and again, but in general, you're going to be out in the open and unprotected, and if an opponent's got their crosshairs on you, you're probably toast. If the final shot is a few frames too fast or too slow in reaching you, it's not that noticeable. It's only going to register as suspicious if it's egregiously out of sync. For example, if the opponent doesn't appear to be firing in your direction, or the fight has long since ended. Brellas, however, go into battle with the assumption that if their shield is up, they are protected, which means that even small discrepancies are going to be more noticeable because the shield appears to be deployed. With the game's connections being as suspect as they are, a shielding class like Brellas is going to be the first to notice any problems. Number 2. The bugs. Sure, network issues may have been a problem, but you can't blame all the weird Brella glitches on the internet. As a weapon class in Splatoon 2, Brellas may not have always been meta, but they were dependable weapons that generally functioned the way people expected them to. To have them go from generally reliable in Splatoon 2 to completely unreliable in Splatoon 3 was pretty jarring, and it raised a lot of uncomfortable questions. First, how on earth could a weapon decay this badly between games? What could the developers have possibly done between Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3 to break this? Second, how could this class have been released in such a miserable state? Didn't they bother to test any of this stuff before it went live? Third, if the launch was botched this badly, is Nintendo going to be able to fix it? Do they even know how? And if they do, are they even capable of doing it? There's a real sense of distrust with Nintendo when it comes to maintaining games like Splatoon. Remember the Kenza 52 from Splatoon 2? So when problems like these Brella Bugs appear, this distrust is brought right back to the forefront. Number 3. The difficulty of balancing the Brella class. With a shielding and shooting weapon like this, the developers have to walk a fine line, as it wouldn't take much to make such a weapon flip from strong to weak or vice versa. If the shield is too sturdy, the fire rate is too quick, or the shots are too powerful, the Brella could stand against any weapon and wipe it out before it could even threaten the user. Finding that sweet spot where everyone, including the Brella user, has a fighting chance in an engagement is really hard. Now, in the case of the undercover Brella, I actually think this balance between offense and defense is pretty good. While putting together my videos, something I notice is that when I take down a player, the undercover Brella shield would often break at about the same time, meaning that one misstep either way could completely change the outcome of the fight. Many times, it felt like the Brella had just enough power to come out on top, and even a small buff or nerf might throw off that balance and make it either overpowered or unusable. That's why, for most of the Undercover Brella's major attributes, things like damage per projectile, fire rate, shield HP, frames before firing or regenerating ink, I would leave them as they are. Now, Splat and Tentabrellas play differently and thus need different balances, but the overall goal is the same, to make sure that both the Brella and the opponent can have a fair fight. If a small tweak can make a huge difference, the developers are going to be very careful and deliberate with what they do. And until they get it right, they're going to be really stingy about giving us alternative kits that might change the balance even more. Number 4. The update schedule. Splatoon's slower release schedule is causing a disconnect between the developers and the game's audience. And to quote an old commercial that I can't seem to find on YouTube, people tend to assume the worst if you don't tell them that you really care. In the first 2 Splatoon games, the constant drip of new content and relative frequency of patches made it feel like the development team was more engaged and responsive, and that any problems that arose would be quickly addressed and taken care of. There was also little advance warning as to what was coming, which gave players a sense that anything was possible. If your preferred weapon didn't appear this week, maybe it might show up next week. In Splatoon 3, however, Nintendo publicly committed to a slower, more deliberate schedule for post-release content, organizing drops into 3-month seasons and laying all their cards, catalogs, on the table in advance. Whether or not this change was for the better or not can be debated until the squids come home, but the move had 2 major side effects. It weakened the connection between the developers and the community, and made it seem like Nintendo was less interested or invested in the game, even if the update schedule thus far hasn't been that far off of the schedule for the first 2 games. And it meant that if a weapon class was left out of a seasonal update, it would be 3 months before they got another chance to get into the action. If you miss 2 updates like the Brellas have, well, you start to assume the worst. So, imagine that you're a Brella player. Your beloved weapon arrives in Splatoon 3 as a glitchy mess. You've seen a bunch of bug fixes for your weapon, but it's simultaneously uplifting and disheartening. I mean, it's great to see the problems getting fixed, but why were there so many problems in the first place? You've borne the brunt of Splatoon 3's network issues, and given the company's poor track record with online play and mediocre efforts to address the problem so far, you don't have much hope that things will get better. You haven't gotten anything from the game's balance changes or content updates, and unlike Splatanas and Stringers, you're not one of the shiny new weapon classes that have been at the forefront of the game's marketing campaign. You're stuck waiting until June for any alternate kits to shake up the game, and if nothing shows up then, your next chance will be in September. You appreciate all the love and focus being given to Splatoon 1, but given that your weapon didn't show up until Splatoon 2, all that love and focus isn't going to help you either. Given all this, you could forgive a Brella player for wondering if they've been forgotten. So what can be done to fix this issue? Well, fix the Brellas is the obvious answer, but I think the first step is communication. Tell us why Brellas appear to be on the back burner. I've discussed the difficulty of balancing a weapon like this, but it would be nice to hear this directly from the Splatoon team. We need some way for the folks behind the game to tell the story behind the game. Why were Brellas in such rough shape at the start of Splatoon 3? What difficulties has the team run into while fixing them? And while they're at it, why are the maps shaped like Tetris pieces? Where do certain weapon buffs and nerfs originate from? Seriously, that random 52 gal special point drop still feels awfully sus to me. Starting that sort of dialogue, even if it's over a curated one-way channel, would go a long way towards helping players understand the state of the game. And while not everyone would agree with the provided rationale, at least we'd know where the developers were coming from. In the end, everyone wants the same thing: a fun, reliable game that delivers years of enjoyment for players and prints money for Nintendo. Giving each weapon class an equal amount of attention and care would go a long way in a game that's showing serious signs of shooter privilege. And if that isn't possible, at least the community should know why this is the case. Otherwise, we're left with nothing but speculation and suspicion to fill the void, and that never turns out well. So in the end, what happened to Brellas? Well, a series of unfortunate technical issues, policy choices, and unexplained decisions left players in the dark and Brellas out in the cold. Nintendo can't fix all of this in a day, but they could at least let us know that they're trying, and for now, I'd settle for that. Well, that and a new 96 gal kit, so I guess we're already halfway there, right? So what do you think about the current state of the Brella class? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you again in a future video. So long!